Welcome back to the Sleepy Archive. Tonight, we leave the world behind. We let the noise of the day fall away, slowly and without effort, like a cloak slipping from tired shoulders. We find ourselves somewhere warm and ancient, somewhere along the banks of a great and patient river, in a land where the sun rises golden over the desert and the water moves dark and slow through the reeds. Tonight, we go to Egypt. Not the Egypt of golden thrones and warrior pharaohs, not the Egypt of conquest and empire. Tonight, we go to the Egypt of the ordinary people, the farmer who rises before the sun to tend his field, the merchant who arranges his wares in the cool of the morning market, the priest who moves quietly through the inner corridors of a temple at the edge of a canal, the mother who braids her daughter's hair and tells her the old stories before the lamps are lit. This is their story, and it is a quiet one. Settle in now, let your breathing slow. There is nothing to do and nowhere to be. The river is calling you back across 4,000 years, and all you have to do is close your eyes and listen. Everything in ancient Egypt began with the Nile. To understand the people of this land, you must first understand the river, not as a body of water, not as a geographical feature on a map, but as the living heart of everything. The Egyptians did not think of the Nile the way we think of rivers. They thought of it the way we might think of a parent. Something that gave life. Something that could, if displeased, take it away. Something to be respected, thanked, and never taken for granted. The Nile flooded every year. The Egyptians called this the inundation, and they called the season of flooding Akhet, which means something like the season of the flood or the season of renewal. It came in the summer months, predictable and reliable, year after year, century after century. The river would rise and spread across the low-lying fields on either side of its banks, depositing a thin layer of rich, dark silt across the land. And then it would retreat, leaving the soil behind, and the farmers would walk out onto their fields and begin. This dark soil was called Kemet, the Black Land. The Egyptians called their own country Kemet, the Black Land, after the soil that fed them. The desert beyond was the Red Land, the Deshret, the place of chaos and danger, and the dead. To live in Egypt was to live in the narrow green band between the river and the desert, in a world defined by this annual miracle of water and soil. Imagine standing at the edge of such a field as the flood recedes. The air is warm and thick with the smell of wet earth. The soil beneath your feet is soft and dark, almost black, and it sticks to the soles of your sandals as you walk. The river, still high after the flood, moves quietly a short distance away. Herons stand motionless in the shallows. The sky overhead is enormous and very blue. This is where most Egyptians lived, along the river, in small villages and larger towns, in mud brick houses that kept the interior cool, even in the fierce heat of midday. Most people, the vast majority, were farmers. They grew emmer wheat and barley. They grew flax for linen. They kept cattle and sheep and goats. They fished in the river and hunted waterfowl in the reeds. They brewed beer and baked bread. They lived, in most respects, lives of hard and quiet work, interrupted by the festivals of the gods, the rise and fall of the flood, the steady turning of the agricultural year. Let us spend some time with them. Let us walk through their days. The Egyptian day began early, in a small farming village on the west bank of the Nile, somewhere in the middle of the New Kingdom period, perhaps around 1300 years before the Common Era. A family stirs before the sun has fully risen. The father, a man we might call Amenhotep, though his neighbors probably called him something shorter and more familiar, rises from his sleeping mat in the back room of the house. His wife, Nefert, is already awake. She has been awake for some time, grinding grain. The house is small and simply made. The walls are mud brick, plastered smooth and whitewashed inside. The roof is flat, useful for sleeping on hot summer nights and accessed by a short ladder. There are perhaps 3 or 4 rooms. The main room is used for everything: eating, working, receiving the occasional visitor. At the back, near the cooking area, there is a small niche in the wall where a household god stands. It might be Bes, the dwarf god with a lion face, the protector of households and women in childbirth, or Taweret, the pregnant hippopotamus goddess who stands upright and holds an ankh. These are not grand gods. They are the gods of ordinary life, the ones you whisper to in the morning and thank at night. Nefert grinds grain on a flat stone with a cylindrical handstone, pushing forward and back in a slow, rhythmic motion. The sound fills the quiet house. It is a sound that has filled Egyptian houses for thousands of years and will continue to fill them for thousands more. The grain becomes flour, and the flour will be mixed with water and yeast and a little salt and shaped into round, flat loaves and baked in a clay oven in the courtyard. Bread is everything in ancient Egypt. It is the foundation of every meal, the unit of trade, the substance of life. When Egyptians pray for abundance, they pray for bread. When they bury their dead, they leave bread in the tomb. When they pay their workers, they often pay in bread. The word for bread in ancient Egyptian is also, in some contexts, the word for food itself. Amenhotep steps out into the courtyard. The air is still cool, the sky turning from deep purple to the pale gold of early morning. He drinks a cup of beer, not the strong, sweet beer of a festival, but the thin, watery beer that Egyptians drink instead of water, because the Nile water, while sacred, carries with it all manner of things that can make you ill. The beer is mildly fermented, low in alcohol, more like a thick grain drink than what we would recognize. It is filling and safe, and the Egyptians drink it constantly, from morning to night, adults and children alike. He eats a piece of yesterday's bread, perhaps with a smear of date paste, perhaps with a few dried figs. He feeds the animals, a few goats, some chickens, a donkey that he will need for the fields today. His children, a boy of perhaps 10 and a girl of 7, emerge sleepily from the house. They eat their bread standing up, watching their father with half-open eyes. The boy will come to the fields today. He has been helping his father since he could walk, learning the work not from instruction, but from repetition, from watching, from doing. He knows how to plant and how to harvest. He knows how to judge the readiness of a crop by its color and feel. He is learning the old knowledge, the knowledge that passes from father to son and mother to daughter, the knowledge that keeps a family alive. The girl will stay home with her mother today. She will learn other things: how to bake the bread, how to brew the beer, which requires soaking grain and adding a little old fermented bread to start the process, leaving it in clay pots in the shade to ferment gently. How to spin flax into linen thread. How to keep the house. How to bargain in the market. How to manage the household supplies of grain and oil and dried fish and onions that are stored in large sealed clay jars against the wall of the main room. This is not a diminished life. It is a different one. Women in ancient Egypt had more legal rights than women in almost any other ancient civilization. They could own property. They could inherit. They could bring lawsuits. They could conduct business in their own names. A woman who managed a household in ancient Egypt was managing a significant economic enterprise, keeping track of stores and trades and the labor of children and servants. Nefert knows this. She is not unhappy. Amenhotep picks up his hoe and sets off down the path to the fields, his son at his side, the donkey following patiently behind. The fields of Egypt were divided into long strips, allocated by the village headman according to a system that had been in place for generations. Every farmer knew his strip. He knew its boundaries, its quirks, the way it held water after the flood, the places where the soil was richest, and the places where it was thin. Amenhotep is planting today. The flood has receded, and the soil is still moist and rich. He walks along his strip with the hoe, breaking up the surface of the soil into a fine tilth, working methodically, moving slowly. The sun is climbing now and beginning to make its heat felt. He wears a simple white linen kilt, the standard garment of an Egyptian man of his class. His chest is bare. His feet are in simple sandals of woven papyrus. His son walks behind him with a bag of seed grain, dropping seeds into the loosened earth at regular intervals. Behind the boy, a small flock of sheep are being led back and forth across the planted rows by a neighbor's son. The sheep's hooves press the seeds into the soil. It is an efficient system, old as the fields themselves. Around them, other farmers are doing the same. The fields are busy, but not noisy. Men work in a focused quiet, broken occasionally by a shouted word to a neighbor, the lowing of cattle, the distant sound of women singing somewhere near the canal. At midday, the heat is too great to work. Amenhotep and his son retreat to the shade of a sycamore fig tree at the edge of the field. They drink water from a clay jug, eat flatbread and onions and a few olives. The boy falls asleep in the shade. His father sits with his back against the tree and watches the river, which is visible in the distance as a dark gleam between the banks of green. He is not a rich man. He pays his taxes in grain to the village storehouse, which in turn sends a portion to the regional granary, which sends its portion to the great storehouses of the temple and the state. The system of taxation in ancient Egypt was not about money, because money in the modern sense did not yet exist. It was about grain. Grain was the wealth of Egypt. The granaries of the pharaoh were the banks of the nation. But Amenhotep is not poor either. He has his house, his animals, his tools, his family. In a year when the flood is good and the harvest is plentiful, he will have enough grain to fill his own storage jars and still have some left over to trade at the market for the other things his household needs. Oil from the oil makers, fish from the fishermen down by the river, pottery from the potter, a new sandal from the sandal maker. The village is a web of trade and mutual dependence. each family producing something that the others need, the whole thing held together by the ancient reciprocity of neighbors who know they will need each other when things go wrong. When the boy wakes from his nap, they return to the fields. The afternoon light is long and golden. Herons are fishing in the canal nearby. A flock of ibises passes overhead, black against the pale sky. They work until the light begins to fail, then load the tools onto the donkey and walk home through the cooling evening air. Not far from Amenhotep's village, where a road meets the river at a natural landing point, there is a market. It meets twice a month, on days that are calculated according to the ancient religious calendar, always on days that are considered auspicious, good days when the gods are favorably disposed toward human commerce. The market is held in the open air, under awnings of woven reeds and palm fronds. By mid-morning, it is busy with farmers, craftsmen, merchants from the nearby town, and occasionally traders from farther afield who have traveled up or down the river by boat. There is noise here and movement and the particular energy of human exchange. An oil maker has set out his jars of sesame oil, castor oil, and the precious and expensive oil pressed from the seeds of the moringa tree, which the Egyptians use for cooking, for lamps, and for anointing the skin. A woman beside him sells dried fish arranged on a woven mat, the small Nile fish that have been split and dried in the sun until they are hard as wood and will keep for months. A potter has brought his wares on a low cart, bowls and plates and storage jars and the small, finely made cups that the wealthy use for drinking wine. The pottery of ordinary Egyptians is not decorated with the elaborate scenes we associate with Egyptian art. It is simple, functional, reddish-brown, occasionally burnished to a low shine, but it is well made. The Egyptians are excellent potters. A carpenter has brought wooden headrests, the objects that Egyptians sleep on instead of pillows, carved from a single piece of acacia wood and designed to support the neck rather than the head. He also has small wooden boxes for cosmetics and amulets and a few simple stools. Wood is expensive in Egypt, where trees are few, and a good carpenter charges well for his work. There are transactions happening everywhere, all of them conducted by barter. There is no money. A farmer might trade a measure of grain for a jar of oil, then trade some of that oil for a length of linen, then trade the linen for a small bronze knife. The Egyptians have a rough system of value in which a standard unit of copper, called a daben, serves as an abstract measure of worth, even though the daben itself is rarely physically present in a transaction. Prices are quoted in debens, but paid in grain or oil or linen or whatever, both parties agree upon. A woman bargains with a cloth merchant over the price of a length of fine white linen for her daughter's wedding dress. She wants to pay in dried figs. He wants grain or oil. They argue cheerfully, moving their hands, quoting prices in debens, eventually settling on a compromise that involves figs plus a small quantity of dried fish. Both walk away satisfied. This is how most commerce in ancient Egypt works. At the edge of the market, a scribe sits at a low table with a palette of ink and a bundle of papyrus strips. For a small fee, he will write a letter, record a transaction, draw up a simple contract. Most Egyptians cannot read or write. Literacy in ancient Egypt, even at the height of the civilization, is probably less than 5% of the population. The scribes are the educated class, the administrators, the record keepers, the ones who keep the vast machinery of the state functioning. They are respected and relatively well paid. A good scribe can rise high in the service of the temple or the government. This particular scribe is recording a land transfer. Two farmers have agreed to exchange strips of land to make their holdings more convenient, and they want the transaction recorded so that neither party can later deny it. The scribe writes on papyrus in hieratic script, the flowing cursive form of Egyptian writing used for everyday documents. Hieroglyphs, the elaborate pictorial script we associate with temple walls, are reserved for monumental inscriptions and religious texts. The paperwork of ordinary life is written in hieratic, which is faster to write and just as precise. When he finishes, he reads the document aloud to both parties, who touch it to indicate their agreement, since neither can sign their name. He adds his own mark as witness and the date. The transaction is recorded for posterity, and also, more practically, for the village headman's records. Down by the river itself, in the reed beds at the edge of the water, life has its own rhythm, different from the farmer's world, and yet deeply intertwined with it. The fishermen go out before dawn. They work from small papyrus reed boats, light and flexible, paddled with a single long oar, or sometimes they work in pairs, dragging a net between two boats through the shallows. The Nile in this period is rich with fish: tilapia, catfish, perch, the great Nile perch that can weigh as much as a man. Fish is the protein of the common people. The wealthy eat meat, beef and goose and duck and wild game. But for most Egyptians, fish is the everyday supplement to a diet of bread and vegetables. A fisherman named Ka rises in the dark and pushes his boat out into the current. The river is black and silver in the pre-dawn light. The stars are still out. He works quietly, not wanting to disturb the fish or the silence, setting his net with practiced care, then waiting, watching the water, the net barely visible in the dark. He has been doing this since he was a boy, as his father did before him. He knows the river the way a farmer knows his field. Every depth and current, the places where the fish gather at certain times of day, the spots where the banks shelve suddenly into deep water, the time of year when the great migrations of Nile perch move through. He is not romantic about the river. He respects it and sometimes fears it. He has lost two friends to the river over the years, one to a crocodile and one to a sudden current during the flood. By mid-morning, he has pulled in his net twice and has a good catch in the bottom of the boat, flopping and silvery in the growing light. He paddles back to shore and gives half the catch to his wife, who will gut and clean them and set some out to dry in the sun. The rest he will take to the market. The river also brings things from elsewhere. The boats that move up and down the Nile carry goods from the far south, gold and ivory and ebony and exotic animals from the lands beyond the cataracts, and goods from the north, from the delta and the Mediterranean coast. Occasionally, a large trading vessel passes through, its sail bright against the sky, its decks loaded with cedar wood from Lebanon or copper from Sinai. The river is Egypt's highway, and the traffic on it connects the smallest village to the wider world. Ka watches one of these boats pass, a large sailing vessel moving steadily downstream with the current. He raises a hand. Someone on the boat raises a hand back. He does not know where the boat has come from or where it is going. He does not need to know. He returns to his fishing. In every Egyptian town and village, there is a temple. It might be a grand structure of carved stone, or it might be a modest mud brick enclosure with a small sanctuary at its center. But there is always a temple, because the temple is not just a place of worship. It is the administrative center of the community, the granary, the school, the hospital, the home of the local god. The god of this particular town is Khnum, the ram-headed creator god, who is said to have fashioned human beings on his potter's wheel from the clay of the Nile. There is a modest temple to Khnum on the edge of the town, with a gateway of whitewashed stone and a small sacred lake fed by a canal from the river, where the priests perform their ritual ablutions before entering the sanctuary. The priests who serve Khnum are not full-time religious professionals in the way that modern clergy are. Most of them are ordinary men of the town, merchants, scribes, local officials, who serve in the temple on a rotating basis, perhaps 1 month in 4. During their month of service, they follow strict rules of ritual purity, daily bathing in the sacred lake, shaving the head and body, wearing white linen, abstaining from certain foods. When their month is done, they return to their ordinary lives. But there are a few full-time priests and priestesses, including the chief priest, who manages the temple and its estates, and a group of women known as chantresses of Khnum, who sing and play music during the temple rituals. One of these women is a young woman named Isis Nefert, who joined the temple singers when she was 12 and has served there now for 15 years. She is not a priestess in the full sense. She does not enter the inner sanctuary or perform the rituals, but she is a recognized member of the temple community, paid in grain and oil and linen for her service. Every morning before sunrise, the chief priest enters the inner sanctuary alone. The statue of Khnum, carved from black granite and no taller than a man's forearm, stands in its shrine in the deepest part of the temple. The priest opens the shrine doors, which were sealed with a clay seal the evening before. He greets the god as one might greet a dignitary after a night's sleep. He removes the linen wrapping that has been placed on the statue the night before. He washes the statue with sacred water. He anoints it with oil. He presents it with a small meal, bread, beer, dried fish, fruit, laid out on a little offering table. He dresses the statue in fresh linen and applies a tiny touch of kohl to its eyes. Then he withdraws, sweeping away his footprints with a small broom as he goes, sealing the shrine doors again with fresh clay. The god has been attended to. The day can begin. This ritual is performed every day of the year, without exception, by priests in temples all across Egypt. It is one of the most extraordinary features of Egyptian religious life, the idea that the gods, like humans, need to be fed and washed and dressed and maintained. The temple is not primarily a place where humans come to worship. It is a place where the gods are cared for. The rituals of the temple maintain the divine order of the universe, the principle the Egyptians called Ma'at, which means truth and justice and balance and rightness all at once. Ma'at is perhaps the central concept of Egyptian civilization. It is the idea that the universe has an order, a rightness, a proper way of functioning, and that it is the duty of every person, from the pharaoh down to the humblest farmer, to support and maintain that order through right living and right action. The pharaoh maintains Ma'at on a cosmic scale through ritual and just governance. The priest maintains it through the daily care of the gods. The farmer maintains it by working his land faithfully and paying his taxes. The mother maintains it by raising her children well and treating her neighbors honestly. It is a beautiful idea, and it permeates everything in Egyptian life, from the grandest temple to the smallest household. The afternoon in a small Egyptian town is quieter than the morning. The heat is at its most intense between noon and mid-afternoon, and sensible people take shelter from it. The streets are mostly empty. Dogs sleep in whatever shade they can find. Chickens scratch listlessly in the dust. Even the river seems to move more slowly in the midday heat, its surface heavy and flat. Inside the cool interiors of the mud brick houses, the day continues at a different pace. Women weave, the rhythmic clack of the loom providing a counterpoint to the distant sound of the river. Children nap or play in the shade of the courtyard. An old man sits against the warm wall of his house and dozes. When the heat begins to ease in the late afternoon, life reanimates. The children are sent to collect water from the canal or the public water trough near the center of the village. Women take bread from the ovens and set it to cool. Men begin the walk home from the fields. The village fills with the smell of cooking, onions frying in oil, beer fermenting in its jars, the sweet smell of dates drying on rooftop mats. The evening meal is the main meal of the day. The family of Amenhotep gathers in the main room of their house as the light fades. Tonight, there is bread and a thick soup of lentils flavored with cumin and coriander, which Nefert has been simmering since midday. There are onions and garlic, which the Egyptians eat in great quantities and which they believe to have protective properties against illness. There are dried figs and a few dates. There is beer. They eat sitting on mats on the floor, the food in common dishes from which everyone helps themselves. There is no formal division of portions. The food is abundant enough tonight, and everyone eats their fill. After eating, the family sits for a while in the last light of the evening. Amenhotep's wife combs their daughter's hair with a fine-toothed wooden comb. The ancient Egyptians are meticulous about hair care and personal grooming. Kohl is applied around the eyes, not just for beauty, but for protection against the glare of the sun and against eye infections, which are common in the dusty Egyptian climate. The cosmetic properties and the medicinal ones are not distinguished. They are the same thing. The boy is already half asleep against his father's side. His father strokes his head absently, staring at nothing in particular, his mind running over the work of the day and the work to come tomorrow. There is always more to do. But tonight, the field is planted, and the animals are fed, and the bread has been baked, and the family is safe inside the walls of the house. And that is enough. No account of ordinary Egyptian life can pass over the subject of death, because the Egyptians thought about death differently than almost any other people in history. For them, death was not an ending. It was a transition, a journey. And the preparation for that journey was something that occupied the living throughout their lives. The idea was this: the human being was composed of several elements that did not all die together. The body, of course, but also the ka, a kind of life force or spiritual double that needed to be sustained after death by offerings of food and drink. And the Ba, something like what we might call the soul, or the personality, which could move freely between the land of the living and the land of the dead. And the Ak, the transformed spirit of the blessed dead who had successfully passed through the judgment of the gods. For the wealthy and powerful, preparation for the afterlife was an elaborate and expensive affair. Mummification, elaborate tombs filled with everything a person might need in the next world, thousands of Ushabti figurines who would perform any labor required in the afterlife so that the dead person would not have to work. The paintings on the walls of elite tombs depict the ideal afterlife. Fields of perfect grain, endless feasting, beautiful gardens, beloved family members. For ordinary people, the preparations were simpler, but the belief was the same. A modest tomb, perhaps just a shaft cut into the desert sand and lined with mud brick. A few basic grave goods. A pot of beer, a loaf of bread, a beloved object from life, perhaps a simple coffin of painted wood, perhaps just a linen wrapping, but the ordinary person was no less cared for by the gods. The judgment of the dead in Egyptian theology was not about wealth or status. It was about character. In the Hall of Two Truths, the heart of the dead person was weighed on a great scale against the feather of Ma'at, the feather of truth and justice. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it was devoured by the monster Ammit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, and the person ceased to exist entirely. If the heart was light, balanced against the feather, the person passed on to the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise, where life continued in perfected form. What did it mean to have a light heart? The Egyptians were specific about this. A spell known as the negative confession from the Book of the Dead lists the things a virtuous person had not done. I have not caused pain to others. I have not made anyone weep. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not been violent. I have not turned away the poor. I have not reduced the measure of grain. I have not cheated at the scale. These are not the virtues of warriors or kings. They are the virtues of neighbors, of community members, of people who live in close proximity and whose flourishing depends on treating each other honestly and kindly. The ethics of ordinary Egyptian life, carved in stone and papyrus, speak of a people who valued decency and fairness above power and glory. Life in ancient Egypt was not only work and devotion, there was joy as well. The Egyptian religious calendar was full of festivals. Each god had at least one festival day, and the great gods had several. These were not private religious observances. They were public celebrations attended by the whole community, involving processions, music, dancing, feasting, and the temporary suspension of ordinary rules and hierarchies. During the Festival of the Valley, which took place each year at the time of the new moon in the second month of summer, the sacred bark of a moon was carried across the river from the great temples of Karnak and Luxor to the necropolis on the west bank, where the dead were buried. The whole community participated, the living crossing over to the realm of the dead, eating and drinking and singing in the tomb, chapels of their ancestors, the dead believed to be present and partaking of the celebration alongside them. It was an extraordinary moment in the year. The boundary between the living and the dead became permeable, and the two worlds met and mingled in an atmosphere of celebration rather than grief. The Egyptians did not fear their dead. They loved them and fed them and talked to them and included them in the life of the community. Death was a continuation, not an ending. On festival days, the temples distributed bread and beer to all comers. The granaries of the gods were, in this sense, also the social welfare system of Egypt. In times of famine or hardship, it was the temples that fed the people. The great temples of Amun at Karnak controlled vast agricultural estates, thousands of workers, herds of cattle, fleets of boats. They were economic powerhouses as much as religious institutions. On a festival morning, the whole village is alive with a different energy. Children run through the streets in new linen clothes, their eyes freshly cold, flowers tucked into their hair. Women prepare special festival foods, honey cakes and sweet wine and roasted meats. Musicians gather near the temple gate. Women with sistrums, the small rattle-like instruments sacred to Hathor, the goddess of love and music, and men with harps and double flutes and small drums. When the procession begins, the statue of the god emerges from the temple in its covered shrine, carried on the shoulders of priests. The crowd presses forward to be near the divine presence. People shout out petitions to the god, requests for healing and justice and fertility and good harvests. The god, through the priests who interpret the movements of the bark, gives answers. A forward movement for yes, a backward movement for no. This is how ordinary Egyptians accessed the divine, not through private prayer alone, but through these public encounters, these moments when the world of the gods became briefly, radiantly present in the world of the living. The god passed through the crowd, and the crowd was transformed. Let us end with the children. In ancient Egypt, children are beloved and, in an age of high infant mortality, precious. Not all of them survive. The loss of a child is a common sorrow, inscribed in the archaeological record by the small graves that appear in every cemetery, the little bodies wrapped in linen with their toys and amulets beside them. A small clay horse, a painted wooden doll with jointed arms, a string of blue faience beads. But the children who survive grow up quickly and with purpose. They are put to work early, helping with whatever their parents do. But they also play. Archaeologists have found spinning tops and balls and marbles in Egyptian settlements. They have found board games, senet, which is something like a combination of chess and the game of life, and mehen, played on a spiral board in the shape of a coiled serpent. They have found toy animals and carved wooden horses on wheels and small boats for sailing in the canal. Egyptian children swam in the Nile and climbed trees and chased each other through the streets and got into exactly the kind of trouble that children get into in every time and place. They caught birds in the marshes and kept them as pets. They made mud figures on the riverbank and baked them in the sun. A girl named Merit, 7 years old, sits on the warm mud brick of a low wall near her house in the late afternoon, her legs dangling, watching the activity of the street below. She is wearing a simple white linen dress and a string of blue and red beads. Her hair is shaved close except for a single long side lock over her left ear, the traditional hairstyle of Egyptian children, which will be cut when she reaches puberty. She is watching a potter across the street who is throwing a large storage jar on his wheel. The wheel turns and the clay rises and narrows and swells under his hands. And Merritt watches this with the pure absorption of a child for whom the world is still full of miracles. She has watched him work before, and she still cannot understand how the shapeless lump of clay becomes this beautiful and useful thing. She is also in the pocket formed by her dress over her lap, hiding a small frog she caught in the canal this morning. The frog is very still, which she finds concerning. She nudges it gently with one finger, and it leaps for freedom over the edge of the wall and into the street below, where it sits for a moment, looking astonished before hopping purposefully toward the canal. Merritt watches it go and feels the particular poignant mixture of relief and loss that comes with setting something free. She jumps down from the wall and runs home for dinner. The sun has set over the Nile. The sky in the west is a deep, burning orange fading upward into the dark. The first stars are appearing. From somewhere in the village comes the sound of music, someone playing a harp in the cool of the evening, the notes drifting out over the rooftops and the river, gentle and clear in the still air. The people of ancient Egypt lived their lives in the same light that we live ours, the same sunlight, the same moonlight, the same stars. They worried about their children and hoped for good harvests and argued with their neighbors and fell in love and grew old and tried to be decent. They built extraordinary things and also did ordinary things, and the ordinary things took up most of their days, as ordinary things do for all of us. They believed that the world had an order, a rightness, a balance, and that it was worth trying to live in harmony with that order, worth treating each other with honesty and care, worth pausing in the day to thank the gods for water and grain and the soft air of evening. They are gone now, 4,000 years behind us. But they are not entirely gone. The farmer who stood at the edge of his field in the morning light and breathed in the smell of the Nile soil is not so different from anyone who has ever stood at the edge of something they tended, breathed in the morning, and felt grateful. The river still flows. The stars are still out. The world is still full of ordinary days, each one worth living. Let sleep come to you now, gently and without effort. Let the river carry you. Let the stars keep watch. The ancient world is all around you tonight, quiet and vast and kind. Rest now. Good night.